by name, address, contact person, telephone number, email address, and nature of relationship with vendor. I mean, that's what it says now. I don't know why.
Well, our proposed solution is to combine these two and say a statement of qualifications, including experience, background, description, and three, very important, three examples of similar works successfully performed by a vendor, at least one of whom should be affiliated with local government, providing URLs, client names, and contact information.
So we're just wordsmithing.
No,
we
it's
can do that.
different. It's different. You're talking about two different references. We want references from, we want to make sure that our references are based on the work that they've done, whereas the way you have it written, it could be just someone who kind of, says, yeah, I know that guy, and he's a good guy, and he does a good work.
Okay, but if you're a responder to this kind of RFP, you're probably going to provide references of people that'll say, you do good work of the nature that you're, seeking to get. That's what we usually is going to happen. But again,
And
we
then
can.
we'll probably provide examples of websites where they're confident that the client
Sure.
will give them a good, good work. So
Right.
that's why I see it as redundant, that as long as they have three examples of websites and are willing to provide that client's information, that those can serve as references.
So on that one, the wording can be however you all choose. If you prefer the wording they've recommended, that's fine. The next issue about license, this is simply a requirement that all vendors be licensed in the state. The comment was, I think William was involved in a project at the college and it involved a California company and they didn't need a license. If they don't need a license, they don't have to deal with it. But what we're concerned about is an out-of-state corporation. If they're going to do business in Maryland, they have to be at least registered as a foreign corporation to do business in Maryland. And we're going to require that. So we're not creating a new licensing that they otherwise don't need, but this is our catch-all language to make sure whoever is going to do business with the town is legally able to do business in Maryland.
When you say we, are you saying that simply because we're a government that we have to require that, and that Washington College wouldn't have required it?
Well, I don't know anything about Washington College and what they're doing, but you shouldn't confuse the issue of license. We don't mean licensing like a specific license to do software. This is to do business in the state of Maryland.
But
And if you're,
companies from outside of state can do business in Maryland.
only if they're registered.
But I mean, that registration process is fairly simple, right?
Correct.
Can we include
Online,
something-
absolutely, online.
I mean, my biggest concern is that it's the way it's worded, and I have to look at it again. It sounds really burdensome because it's vague. What you're saying sounds like a very simple thing to do.
It says, in the case of a non-Maryland corporation, well.
A statement that the corporation will take all necessary steps to become licensed to operate in the state of Maryland. That all necessary steps, if we know what all those steps are, it's just one step. I guess I'm just concerned, that we're,
It's off-putting.
yeah, it's a little discouraging, and if all this is just
The answer,
registering, then.
the answer will be, we're licensed to do business in Maryland.
Or
If
we
they're
will
not-
get licensed.
If they're not, and it's burdensome to them, then
But I'm
the
hearing-
town, we don't recommend that the town do any business with a company that's not fully licensed and authorized to do business in the state of Maryland.
So why don't you just say comply with the laws of Maryland?
Makes sense.
I mean,
In the
that's
case of a
why you
in the
simplify.
case of a non-Maryland corporation, a statement that the corporation will take all steps to become licensed. Okay, we can reword it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
I think it's off-putting.
Still
We
saying the
did
same
kind of
thing.
cover this in our original draft, and it didn't stick into the final draft, but we did try to talk about, how the contract would be subject to the laws of Maryland, which is different than saying the company has to be licensed, but,
Please
that's
understand.
what I'm just saying, that
but-
we were thinking about that, and
Yeah,
we
but-
weren't trying to avoid that.
But no,
So
but
we
you're,
just had a different approach.
but we think like lawyers. I'm worried about things going bad, and we have to sue the company, and we're not gonna chase them in California. If we have to sue the company, we wanna be able to sue them in Maryland. And that's why there's things we're gonna require of any vendor.
So why did you drop the language that the contract awarded shall be governed in all respect by laws of the state of Maryland, and any litigation with respect thereto shall be brought into courts of the state of Maryland? And I guess I thought that would cover your issue right there, wouldn't it? I mean, if you want to bring them to court here, I mean, I'm just saying, he didn't include that in the final draft, but we were trying to do something like that along those lines. So that was language we found in another RFP.
I would just say on these issues, I would let us worry about these legal aspects of the RFP, right?
what I'm trying to get to is what is the goal, what is the purpose, you know, so that we can find a way to do this that doesn't discourage people from applying. So I hear from you what your concerns are, and I say that there's another way to accomplish those goals without discouraging people from out of state for applying. Like, what if some great company in Delaware wants to do this job? I mean, that's no problem, they can drive here all the time, they can meet with the focus groups and,
Right.
you know, we don't wanna discourage them, I mean, I'm
We're not-
sure.
none of this is to say we don't want out-of-state companies. They just have to be
Comply with the laws of Maryland.
compliant to do business in Maryland.
But they have to comply with not just this law, but a lot of other laws too. I mean, I'm sure that, you know, any problem that would cause us to go to court would be more than just about whether they were licensed
Yeah, and
and.
as a liaison to this committee, I'll leave it up to you to, at the tempo of how this discussion goes.
I think that's a hint, we gotta move on, that's fine. But
Well,
I
I'm
think
gonna
I've
leave it up
made
to
my
Brian to make
point.
sure we're covering all the ground. So, Board, take the time,
But the
Board,
key
take the
is,
time you need.
we're not adverse here.
I think we're trying to accomplish the same
I'm
thing,
gonna
but,
protect the town through this process. And I'm open to wordsmithing the language, but there's things that we're gonna insist on before this is published to make sure we're gonna protect the town. We can massage the language and make it more inviting and not off-putting. But the bottom line is, any company that's gonna put in a proposal is gonna have to be licensed to do business in Maryland.
well, that's different than saying you have to obey the laws of the town, of the state of Maryland. I guess now we're back to where we started, but.
I think we can resolve it, I really do. I don't think this is an issue.
It's just, I mean, what I heard earlier in this conversation was just comply with Maryland laws.
Right.
Yeah, I think that includes licensing, you
Well,
know.
it would encompass a wide range, I would think, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so too, and I think that makes the most sense, and I guess, you know, I don't think a company from out of state would find that odd at all. And I'm also, you know, trying to do things for the best interest of the town, and what I believe is that we should have as many people sending proposals as possible, so that we have a good selection of proposals. So, we're really alike, we
feel
just
like
have
that-
different ways to go about it.
We want as many proposals as possible from qualified,
Yes.
legitimate, licensed to do business in Maryland companies.
So it sounds like we're on the same page, then you're looking for as much.
With a smiley face.
Yeah.
Right, we're okay, we're okay.
Okay,
Big
All right.
question, are you okay?
that's it for that one.
On number 4, we agree 100%, no questions should come by phone from any prospective responder. And as far as the town manager's email, I mean, we just go with the one we use. So, I mean, I'm not, and I will mention this at this point. I know I've heard often this recommendation that all town employees should all be using a certain email address and domain name. Already, that's up to you all to do that. This RFP process should not dictate that town policy. That's a mayor and council policy to set. And then this RFP should reflect that. We can't have this RFP drive.
Well,
right? The tail can't wag the dog. It's been brought up often about getting all emails on the same domain. I don't know that that decision has been made or that directive has been issued.
Well, I think one thing
So-
that we do know is, I mean, the town, if it's about as these RFPs go to the point of contact, which certainly would be your town manager, the town manager has outside the Hotmail address, a town manager at Rockwell MD address, so why don't you just use that one and be done with it?
does he have access to it?
It doesn't work.
That's, yeah, so we only went, so to
Yeah.
answer this point, yes, no phone, and yes by email, we don't care what email address.
I don't,
we-
well, not to interrupt, but we have a whole other problem with our email addresses at rocklumd.com right now, because we're not getting anything from our essay contest. Stephanie and Lacey aren't getting emails from you or me or anybody. And then I've contacted Mike and he hasn't gotten back to me, and I've written to him twice. So it's a major problem.
Now, Stephanie also has a
Considering we
clerk
have-
treasurer at rocklandmd.com, so
Yeah.
both Stephanie and Ronnie have
She
an
don't-
alternative.
They don't use that one.
When we talked to her
in
about
case
this,
she said
we
that-
put in our draft, we put the Stephanie's regular rockwellmaryland.com address, the one that she still have, which she did have SL,
That's
or
Wall,
so
that's
that one.
her email.
We talked to her about asking the CBIA to have her town clerk at rockwellmaryland.com forward to the one, the S. Lawler address, because forwarding doesn't take very long to set up. But as long as it stayed within the same domain name, it would be, you know, like, it would be within that domain name, but then that email address that's on the website that says townclerk@rockland.com, at least we'll be going somewhere. I mean, anybody can set up, I mean, I don't mean around it, but I'm just saying like, that sounds like a serious problem needs to be addressed, but the reason why we put slawler@rocklandmaryland.com is because, you know, we wanted to stay in that domain name, and if there was, it's probably, at this stage, I don't know how long it would take to fix that problem, and I think you're right, that, you know, that's something that needs to be addressed, but would it be okay if we just had questions go to slawler@rocklandmaryland.com? I mean, just as a practical matter, is that,
Well, I think
or
it's
should we need
good-
to fix this problem first?
Well, I think one of the things that you point out, Corey, is the paper trail. I mean, I think it's always good to have a paper trail.
Yeah.
And I think if it's in connection with what would be a Rock Hall domain name as opposed to a Hotmail account, outside of where, you know, which may not be secured, as you indicate, I think it's good that it becomes what I would assume as property of the town of Rock Hall, or correspondence that falls under the town's name. So I mean,
I would offer this observation though, if proposed vendors are allowed to submit questions by email, there's no concern about security because all vendors should be, I mean, the way this should work, if a vendor submits a question by email, the response really needs to go to, it needs to be made available to everybody. I mean, it almost needs to be a public answer, so any other prospective vendor sees the answer.
We had gone through a
Okay,
whole
so-
lot about discussion about that, actually.
I know, but so I wouldn't get too caught up in it. I think we agreed, no vendor questions by phone. And, to the extent they have, I mean,
They could always fax us.
maybe you don't invite questions.
and one of the other things.
Because when you do allow vendors to ask questions, you owe it to everybody else who's interested in seeing the answer.
Well,
I mean, a lot
Have a
of,
free meeting then,
Yeah.
like we did with you to discuss.
Well,
it.
we
Or
don't
start a
need to do
website.
that. We don't need to do that, but, the thing
Well,
was that our
I think
original.
a pre-bid is required of it, isn't it?
No.
No?
I mean, you could make it required, but even when you, well, then you limit, if your goal is to have as many vendors as possible, when you start requiring pre-bid meetings and things like that,
We had really tried hard to come up with a solution to this problem, and we actually, you borrowed some language from someplace that said, you know, that no technical questions that materially change the solicitation will be accepted 7 days before the deadline, that no material changes are valid unless formally written out and, you know, posted and given to everybody. I mean, we were trying to figure this out. We thought maybe we could set up a separate website just
Right.
to, you know, make this all really open, but then we were presented with, you know, we were wondering whether that run afoul of the social media policy and all these
I-
things that became rather complicated, and that's why we just came up with this sort
I
of.
recommend no questions.
Well, they're gonna have questions.
Yeah, maybe not.
But the question, the thing is, will they have a question that's
We don't
simple and
allow.
easy to answer and
Sorry,
doesn't
but they're
change this
Well,
RFP?
it's not allowed.
We don't allow
If they-
questions, sorry about the
Yeah,
law.
why,
If they had a question that actually
Just get
changed the
$400,000
RFP, that would be the real problem. You know, if somebody said, oh, yeah, that's
But
right,
it's
we
language
forgot to
you don't
include that, and it was a clarification that would affect everybody. Versus-
but here's the problem if you allow questions. If one vendor calls and asks one question, and they get an answer to that question from whomever, if it's a very, and then their response is based on that answer.
Right.
It
That's
is
why
a
we didn't look at
disadvantage,
iPhone.
it is a disadvantage to every other vendor who never heard the answer to the question.
And that's why you have a pre-bid meeting, to be able to let every vendor come and ask questions, and they can all show up, ask one question, and everybody hears it.
And if I'm not mistaken, did the MFCA,
Where you
when
have
they,
a site.
when the
Blog site.
MFCA had the pre-bid, they took all the questions and they compiled them and put that out there. I
With
thought-
what?
You could have an
Yeah, but
FAQ.
construction, but you have to understand that, construction projects and things like that, and large sums of money, okay?
Not as much.
You're gonna have people take the time to send an employee to a pre-bid meeting to represent and all that. These are smaller companies, and I think if you had a required pre-bid, you might limit your responders who think, well, we don't have the time to send somebody to that. We know what they want, it's okay. I mean, we kinda get that. So, I'm
Would you be
only, I
willing
don't
to
mind.
establish a FAQ page? Like, seriously, you know, like if the question is so frequently asked, or even asked at all?
I mean, that is progressive, that is what people are doing. these
Sure.
days.
Well, as long as you have somebody
I mean, the
to
problem is
answer
the
those
cur-
questions.
The problem is the current
Make sure.
vendor is the one who would have to do it, and it's sort of odd kind of asking him to do it. I guess that's where we kind of went around in circles in
Dan,
our
we need to borrow
discussion.
Dr. Tree.
Who's gonna bid?
Yeah.
Put it on the Facebook
So-
page.
That's the top of the trader.
Which is why we thought to create a separate website, but we weren't sure.
Oh,
whether
hey,
we wanted
Let me
to-
ask you a question. You said on the procurement process, which procurement process are you talking about? The
I'm
one
talking
for
about
code?
selecting a vendor for the website, to do the website.
No, when you say you wanna follow the procurement process,
No, what I meant was I want to make sure the procurement process is fair and
which procurement process are you following?
I am basically, no, I'm not referring to any particular procurement process. I'm just saying, generally speaking, a procurement process has to be fair because you want to make sure, for example, that a vendor doesn't have advanced information. That's what I was referring to, like, in general. We obviously don't have a procurement process. I'm aware of the fact that we don't have a procurement
We do.
process, so it was proposed and not accepted yet.
We do, so.
There's a code, but there's no rules. I know that. We don't, I know that there's
Right,
a
there's
code
no,
that's not
in
there's
accepted.
no format, I mean, we do kind of we do evolve this as we go.
We make our own rules.
So there's no, that is something, you know, as the group who worked on the RFP, we
You did
basically
such a-
had to rely on examples of other RFPs for websites or examples of, you know, RFPs in general, and we came pretty close, I think, but since there's no process, we're basically trying to make sure in this day and age when, you know, for example, we don't want to have email submissions, and yet so many website companies would probably want to submit theirs by email, and so we have to make it really clear, do not submit it by email. You know, there are certain things that are peculiar to this RFP, right? I mean, so, I mean, we were basically starting from the point of, there is no established process. We were relying on some best practices. We
Right.
looked at some other RFPs that are out there for websites.
This is a good RFP. You did such a good job, you won't have any questions. I still recommend you don't.
That's a great vote of confidence, but
Um,
there's nothing.
Can I move on to the next issue, if that's all right? We deleted a whole section that had been included in the original draft involving conflict of interest and collusion. And the reason we recommend deleting that is the town has a conflict of interest policy, and the RFP is gonna require vendors to disclose ownership interest. And that's enough for us to be able to flesh out any conflict of interest. So we don't need to have that paragraph in there, in the RFP. It's just not something we would normally include.
Don't the vendors need to know though, that we have such a policy? Should we refer them to
Well,
the policy?
I hope,
I'm just looking at this from the point of view to vendors, they need as much information as possible. And that if you are implying, I noticed that you had that about ownership, and I thought, oh, that might be what he's doing here, but maybe the vendor, you need to connect the dots for the vendor and say, you know, when you give this ownership information, it's because we're checking for conflict of interest. And what about collusion? That isn't included, is it, in the policy? I have no idea, I haven't seen the policy, so.
well, there shouldn't be collusion. We don't need to say it in an RFP. It's
A lot of
it's
RFPs
extra-
we looked at
Yes,
had
there's
that
a lot of
clause.
collusion in
Yeah.
in the web world.
Okay.
Yeah. We saw this a
Yep.
lot, and just about every RFP that we looked at for websites.
I mean, other
had
attorneys have
something
already
like
put this in their chip, who have done these RFPs for websites.
Okay, I don't know who wrote all the other websites
I
you
don't
looked
either.
at. I don't know if they were reviewed by lawyers. I've answered the concern.
Okay.
It's a paragraph we don't think is necessary in this RFP. If you want to include it, that's up to the mayor and council.
Is there a problem with including it?
I think more language can invite, you know, sometime
But you have to go to the code book and also look at our conflict of interest.
That's why it's good to have this in here.
Could you
Spells it
refer to
out.
the code?
Not much
Can you
at
just
all.
mention, you know, that. in
And when they
accordance
sign
with
this
the
and they
code,
send it in,
blah,
they
blah,
read it.
blah. Like, I guess,
So,
I just, you're
if you
assuming
wanna
everybody
talk-
knows it's there,
so
and we didn't know.
what
it
is
was
your, why would you include all this verbiage? What is your concern?
there.
That a
they're-
vendor is gonna come in here that has a relationship with one of the members of the council, a business relationship or a family relationship, and do business
Possibly.
with the town? Well, I think we have enough safeguards in place to address that without including this language in the RFP.
What safeguards do we
And you
have?
can eliminate
We,
We didn't know there were safeguards. We just know that we looked at some towns, some very large towns, some cities, and when they went out for RFPs, they had verbiage like this on their RFPs, and We figured, you know, this, it solves our problem, we don't have to write it, it's legalese, it is, I mean, we've seen it several times on many websites, so I don't see what the problem could be with it, with including it.
Can I just give you an example? There's a sentence in here that says,